when it comes to data and analytics, um, you want to make sure that you're really building data products and data solutions that really solve problems, because a lot of organizations can spend 2 to 3 years building out a data foundation without actually knowing the problems they're trying to solve.
Mm.
And in the same way, just like in the startup approach, when you're trying to build and generate market demand for something and see if there's market demand, you can do the same thing with data and analytics too. You don't have to have all the data in one place. You can go validate and test. If I had this product that I had for my entire field, would this create value? And how do you test that? You literally, at Ameriprise, I'm not kidding. We brought data together from like 10 of our different systems. We put it together in Excel spreadsheets. And then we went to, I think, like 20 different financial advisors with some insights and said, hey, if you had this and we could help you predict customer churn, would this be valuable? And they were like, yes, we love this. The CEO saw it. And then once we did that, we productionalized it, and then we scaled it out. And so how can you take that approach to really make sure that there's market demand for what you're building before you invest tens of millions or even hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get like all the platform stuff set up?
And that's crazy because it's so common to do that. You think that's the way, you build something, you invest millions of dollars in it, and even from the entrepreneurship side, you go raise funds, the VCs, then you build and then you sell. And it's you have to flip that model, start with the demand, look at what's going on out there, and then build according to what your customers are telling you to build essentially.
100%. And what I find often is, I mean, look, with a lot of corporate kind of, and that's why I call it chief data officers. I actually think of them as chief data entrepreneurs, really. Inside the
Mhm.
organization, they should be thinking about how do we use data to improve the business, whether it's for HR, for sales, for marketing, right, for finance. But a lot of it is really understanding how the business operates,
Mm.
because what you find is that you could spend all the time in the world building what you think is the right data product and then sharing it with the HR team and then finding out that this actually doesn't meet their needs. And so the question is, how quickly can you learn from the HR team? Like, what does their day in the life actually look like? What are really their top few problems that they have? What do the workflows look like? How do we go build something that will really have measurable and meaningful impact? And then let's work backwards. Let's figure out what's the data we need to get that going and support it.
So question, suppose I'm the CHRO of a company, right? What what questions would you ask me, coming, now at Domo and from the consulting experience and entrepreneurship experience to
Yeah.
help me figure out what, where do I start? What value do I have hidden in my data? What questions would you ask me as a CHRO to help me uncover those
Yeah.
low hanging fruits, let's say?
Well, look, I mean, there's kind of two approaches that I like to use. One is really open-ended. Tell me about your problems. Tell me about the challenges you're facing. And often I try to focus on what are your top three problems that you're
Mm.
focusing on. Um, and then, I usually have in my mind some problems that I think uh, the leaders may have. So one thing I'll share with you that we've seen at a lot of organizations, especially ones where there are large workforce teams, is that staffing optimization is a big deal. Like staffing optimization, and then also workforce planning is a big deal. So, like, let me share with you, we work with one of the largest um, automotive retailers here in the US, and they have over 1,200 stores. And it turns out there's a lot of seasonality in their business, and they need to start planning out their hiring for their seasonal workforce well in advance. And if they don't, then they end up hiring more temporary work and temporary workers, and temporary workers are quite expensive. Not only that, they also don't get the longevity, right? They don't get the talent that they can maybe build and keep for a longer term period of time. And so what we help them do is actually go build a whole process to keep track of all of their headcount. And by the way, all this was done in Excel, kind of as best as possible by the stores, but we helped them build a whole system, bringing data together from all of their stores, as well as their sales data and their forecasts, to help them start now doing almost like 3 4 month planning out, store by store. What's the seasonal? How do we make sure that we get the right um, the recruiters now in place to plan for 2 months down the road? We're going to need someone, and then in addition to that, on a day by day level, enabling the store managers to staff better so that way they don't overstaff and then pay extra and then understaff and then lose sales.
Mhm.
And it's been quite staggering. That organization has gone from 75% of temporary workers and 25% full time to now the inverse, 75% full time and 25% part time. And they've got much more labor efficiency as well. Now that's step one. Now other organizations, what they'll do too with these like large teams, they'll start to say, how do we actually go hire the best talent that we think is going to work the best? So we did work, and this was work that I did while I was at McKinsey. Was how do you actually hire the best employees if you run a quick service restaurant chain? And it turns out there's a whole number of factors, but you can assess someone's, for example, how customer friendly they are through surveys and interaction. But then also what we found was that how close they live to that location makes a big deal because transportation is a big deal as well. And it turns out if they live within 1 mile, like, the chances are if they're both, they live close by and they're very friendly, those are potential people that can rise through the ranks relatively quickly and do well and build a career at some of these, at these franchisee type organizations. Again, but every business is different. If you're running a call
Yeah.
center, it's very different than running a QSR versus if you're running claims and you're doing adjusting. Like they're different. And we work with an insurance company that does the same thing. They look for salespeople. How do you find the right talent for the sale? And they hire so many salespeople, and only so many salespeople are successful. How do we figure out the type of profile of those that are going to be more likely to be successful ahead of time, and then really focus in on that talent and hire that talent as much as we can because we know they're going to have higher win rates. So, so it's a combination of, what are your big problems, but then also
Yeah.
sharing some examples of what organizations are doing. And the reality is that as cool as these problems sound, like predicting who's going to be the right, most organizations' problems are still very, I would say, basic.
Yeah.
You know, how do we make sure that we've got all of our workflows and processes associated with our HR processes are streamlined. How do we ensure that we know who our top 100 employees are, our top 1% of employees are, because we want to make sure we do the best to retain them and build talent development profiles around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of it, like let's start with the basics, and then we can build on these as we've got the foundation in the right place.
Yeah, because I can imagine it's hard to understand what aspects, what data is even relevant to the problem I'm solving, and sometimes that might be a challenge as well. What data do I need in order to solve this problem I have? Sometimes I don't even know that. Sometimes it's not obvious. And the question that I wanted to ask, I asked you if what questions would you ask me? But now I'm going to flip the questions. And you, as the
Hmm.
chief data officer, what questions would you like to be asked by the leadership team of, I'm not saying Domo today, but if you were my chief data officer, what questions would you
Hmm.
like me to ask you to better partner and create value for the organization?
That's a great question. Um, I would I would love to hear. Um, so what gets me most excited is when I hear a customer or a business partner that has a vision on how they want to change the way their organization works. So it's almost like, hey, I want to transform the way we sell our product. I was with an asset manager yesterday, and they built a new sales group, and they have I think a visionary leader, and the visionary leader wants to figure out better ways to go attract the right customers. And I shared a couple ideas, but he he's like, oh yeah, I would love to do X, Y, and Z. I'd love to build a data product that did the following things because I know that this would help my sales team, win more deals. So it's almost like, as a chief data officer, you want to help others see the value in data. Uh, at the same time, you also want collaborators and partners who have a big vision and who want to entrust you to help them solve that problem. And if you can work with a partner that says to you, hey, I've got this vision, I want to transform the way my HR organization works. I want to double our retention. I want to uh, hire the best talent. I want to help reduce our waste by this much, and it's a big priority. And I know data and analytics can help us. Can you guide me on how we can go about that? Oh boy, am I
Mhm.
empowered? And is that so much fun when you hear that?
That's great. You're talking about the understanding what the value of data is, and it might be obvious for you, but for many leaders and executives that are not data experts, they might not see it. So why should I pay more attention to data, and how will I benefit from investing more in it and giving the proper attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that if I'm a small organization, um, well, actually, let me say it slightly differently. I think what data allows you to do now, I'm just going to give maybe like a hypothetical example, right?
Yeah.
1,500 years ago, if you were, running a big empire, you know, um, you know, and you'd realize that, hey, I might be in Rome, but I've got many different um, interests all around the world, and I've got different generals that are everywhere in the world, and the information, what ends up happening is that in a world where you lack the information on what's happening in each part of your empire, if you will, you have to, in that case, hire really, really good generals who and give them quite a bit of autonomy to run how they see fit and then escalate things to you as necessary. But there's also a lot of risk associated with it. So at any point in time, if you want information from Asia, it might take you a week to get that information or longer. So you really don't know what's happening in Asia. this is 1,500 years ago. Okay, now let's just go back 10 years, right? If I run a large organization, even if I want to get all of my information on what's happening globally across my business, you'll find that, some information is at your fingertips, but a lot isn't. A lot isn't. And so the reality now is when you've built that data foundation, you've got all that information at your fingertips, you kind of know everything that's happening in your business. And why does that matter? You can respond very quickly. You can figure out how you can optimize faster. But then the most important part becomes is now you can start to use AI and machine learning to help you do things that, honestly are really almost impossible for humans to do. So, for example, when I was at Ameriprise, we built a lot of customer segmentation and churn models and so on. And, we looked at hundreds of data points by customer to understand if they were likely to churn or to grow with us and their lifetime value. And the reality is, a salesperson, they don't need to know how the model works. They just need to understand why the model is coming up with the answer it is, so that way they can go and engage with the customer in the right way. Now, if I had a human manually go through all of these 100 data points and I had every financial advisor go review it, it'd be a pretty excruciating task. They just wouldn't do it. So the machine learning models, on the other hand, they can go sift through that data, they can come up with an insight, they can come up with the analysis, and they can go suggest to the advisor, here's what I think you should do and why. All of a sudden now, I'm now automating a lot of analytics and insights that otherwise would not have been possible. We've been very labor intensive, and quite frankly, we would never would have done. And now we're seeing, even built on top of that, we're seeing automation of workflows and processes. So if I'm doing an interview with someone, um, and there's now all these tools that will, they'll record and they'll transcribe that interview, they'll summarize it, they'll talk about the highlights. They might even, and so if I'm in HR and I'm doing this through interview process, how often is it that you go through an interview process and people don't put their notes together? uh, you know, can we just make that easier? Can we make the and then how often are we picking up on other information and looking at the full picture versus just looking at a subset, right? How do we bring all the information together in a more efficient, effective way? These are just small examples, but now we're going to see this automation that will just help augment us, right? So I think the reality now is what data is allowing you to do is actually, even for small organizations, small teams can scale like empires with just few employees. And then large organizations that are kind of empires, it gives them full visibility into what the heck is happening in their organization and then start building workflows and processes in AI that help automate things that they otherwise would not have done or have been too time consuming to do.